Hey everybody, as promised, this is going to be my, what is it going to be again? Oh right, it's going to be my tattoo tutorial. I really like saying that because it's tattoo tutorial. Anyway, and the reason for doing this is because, as I've mentioned before, I think, I'm not an artist. I'm I think I'm pretty decent at applying color to miniatures, but I can't draw. So, because of this, for a long time, I've primarily used decals when I wanted to do designs on my minis. And in fact, I created a line of decals for that purpose, which I actually think look pretty good. But the fact of the matter is that I like the way hand-drawn designs look on miniatures, and so over the years I've been working on various ways to try to improve how those designs look when I do them, which in the past hasn't been very good. So so I'm going to show you what I do to try to improve the quality of my painted designs, and in this case, tattoos. So anyway, the nice thing about Ogres is that you don't have to do a really, elaborate design in order to make the tattoos look good. All the designs are pretty primitive. So, but you know what, let's just get straight to the tutorial, and we can talk about it as we go. So, step one is decide on a design. Okay, once you've decided on your design, you can move on to step two. Step two is draw your design on a piece of paper. Yeah, I know it seems weird, but trust me, actually drawing it out first and practicing the design before you ever get close to the mini is a great idea. So let's go do that. Alright, for the purposes of this video, I think I'm going to pick this club design here. And so I'm going to practice drawing it on a standard piece of paper. I couldn't find a pencil for this, but the important thing here is that you just sort of get a feel for the design, and so that when it comes time to start doing this on a mini, that you have a better sense of how it feels to draw it. As you can see, to start with, I'm just going to rough out the basic idea of this design and get a sense of proportion and where things go, and let my fingers sort of get to know it. I know that sounds weird. It sounds very like an artsy thing to say. Let your fingers get to know the design. But the truth is that there is sort of a muscle memory at work. So the more you play around with it, the less you have to think about it when it comes time to actually work on the miniature itself. And the goal is to make sure that you don't screw up the mini, right? And so I'm just going to do this several times until I feel like I can move on to the mini. Hey, and look at this. I am not an artist, right? Nobody can accuse me of being an artist, but this really is just sort of sketching, right? So I'm just going to do this several times, and or maybe more, until I feel confident that I can move on to the mini. And so that's it. That's the end of That's the end of step one. Do this until you feel comfortable with the basic design on paper. Alright, now that you're comfortable with the design, draw it again, but this time draw it on the miniature with a pencil. No, seriously. The nice thing about using a pencil is that, I think most of us are more comfortable with using a pencil to try and draw than with using a paintbrush to do the same thing. Unless you're like a professional artist and you draw all the time, or you paint all the time, and I'm talking about painting designs, then you're probably going to feel more comfortable using the pencil. Second, if you make a mistake, you can erase it. So definitely use a light touch when you do it. You want just enough pressure to get the image onto your miniature, but you don't want to embed it into the paint. If you wanted to, you could actually do a clear coat first, like a matte coat, prior to doing this step, and that will allow you to more easily erase without worrying so much about damaging the underlying paint. Probably not a bad idea. I don't always do it. Sometimes I do. And definitely use a matte paint, because if you use a gloss paint or even a semi-gloss, your pencil is going to have a hard time on that surface. So let's go do that. Alright, so now I'm going to attempt to put this design on this really, really curvy surface. It doesn't have to be exact. It just needs to provide a guide for the paintbrush when it comes time to paint it. So I don't think you can see this. But it's there, and I'm not even going to bother with the little details like the spikes and such, because those will be easy enough to add with the brush. Alright, let's see if there. Alright, moving on. Alright, now that we've got that done, the next step is to actually go to paint. I'm generally going to do this in a couple of coats. The first coat being kind of a thin coat, so I'm either going to thin the paint with water, but more likely using some clear medium. And the reason for the medium is that you can thin the paint and make it more transparent without making it watery. You don't want your paint going everywhere, but what you do want, or at least what I do want, is for my first coat to have a sort of a transparent edge. And I think that when you do the if you do the final paint with the harder color in the center and a more sort of feathered edge, you end up with something that looks a little bit more realistic. Look at any tattoo and you'll see that you rarely see a very hard edge tattoo unless it's brand new. So having a little bit of a feathered edge is a good idea. So first step, that thin coat. So let's go do that. Alright, so I've already got some medium in here. This is the heavy metal medium. I'm sure it's the glaze medium that I've got my fingers crossed will be available when the new paints arrive. I'm going to add a little bit of retarder. Let's see if I can find my retarder. There we go. This is golden acrylic retarder, and this is going to keep the paint from drying prematurely. Sorry about the noise, that's my birds. And then just a bit of water to make it all flow nicely and smoothly. Alright, so now I get a small brush. And I am going to do a first coat to block this in. I always find doing this on camera hard to do. Any of the detail work is much easier when I have it up close to my face. Actually, it'd probably help if I have my magnifier on. With my magnifier on, I can't tell what you can see, so I apologize if the video isn't as good as it could be. You know, when you're painting in your, you're not painting, when you're sketching in your design, you should probably do as little as you think you need to. I mean, you could even just do dots that your paintbrush can follow, sort of like a dot to dot, you know, like when you were a kid. You just use your pencil and follow from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and then when you were all done, you would have a design. Well, you can use the same concept here. Alright, and my goal is to have this particular step be fairly transparent. Yeah, that's not too bad. I could make the head of this a little bigger, I think. Because once you have your basic shapes in, it's actually not that hard to modify them. But this is, you know, you'd have to be careful with this step because it's a lot harder to repair problems at this stage. All right, great. So now, I'm gonna let that dry a little bit. I need to make my paint a little heavier. All right, so now that that coat is done, as I said before, now we're going to do a second coat, and this time with a darker coat. I still am going to make it somewhat transparent. I'm going to add a little bit of medium, a little bit of water, so that I don't get a hard transition between the feathered edge and the primary color, but I'll show you how I do that. By the way, this is P3 Coal Black, which I've been using a lot recently. It's sort of a super dark blue with a hint of green, and I think for tattoos, it really has that look of an old tattoo. You know, one that's been in place for a long time, and the color has sort of faded and has become not black anymore. So I think that works pretty well. All right. So now, I think that's good and dry. Now I want to leave the outside edge a little bit transparent compared to the interior. because it gives a little bit more realistic fade to it. And now I'm going to go ahead and go in and do some little spiky bits. Again, much easier to do without worrying about where the camera is. There, that's not too bad. Now when you want to do any cleanup, you just take your flesh color and clean up any rough edges or do any sort of interior work that maybe isn't as hollow as you like. Like if you were doing a skull, for example, this would be the time you'd go back in and do the eyes and the nose. But for this, like I had this area here is supposed to be like a support that is separate from the handle, so I'm just going to better define that. I think the rest of that looks okay. That's a way to go back in and add some extra fine detail. And that's not too bad. So that's that one, but let me show you a few of the other tattoos that I did. This is like a rhinox with arrows. Like a hunt, very tribal hunt tattoo. I forget what that one is supposed to be, but it's like, like jaws around a mountain or something. And of course, the ubiquitous great maw. Now these, instead of drawing it out, I would just do dots in the pattern of the maw, and then that was my starting point and my guide that I would then just sort of stretch out into the sort of tooth-like pattern. And it's not that hard to do. That's here's another version of that right here. And let me see. And yet another version, sort of a recurring theme on these guys. And then a sword for the sword-wielding ogre. And when I can, I also sometimes do them, something on the front, on their chest, not on this guy, but I will probably do one here. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do this just real quick to show you a little freehand, because this one I will just do the four-pronged star, which I've done enough now that I can kind of freehand. And then I just start with a line and then draw them down into a triangle. Paint's a little thin. And do that again here. A line and then draw it back into a triangle. The nice thing, you know, you really don't want these to be perfect. Third line. And then the top. I'm not an artist, but I play one on YouTube. That's still drying, but not too bad. And that's it. And that's it. Really not much to this. Yes, if you have a detailed design, it does take some practice. If you want, you know, super detail, you kind of need to know how to draw. I mean, there's no getting around that. But I think with these techniques, you should find it a lot easier to do the basic tribal tattoos that you would normally do on an ogre. And you could apply it to other things later on too. Doing some Space Marines, and you want chapter symbols. Maybe you're doing Dreadfleet, you want to do some script on the sails. You know, the same techniques can apply to that. So I hope you found this helpful, and I will talk to you later.